All right, friends, how's it going? It's Matt. You listen to Looking Sideways Action Sports Podcast, the show where I try and uncover the most fascinating stories in action sports and other related endeavours. How are you doing out there? All good? Nice one. So let's get to it. My guest this week is my great friend, Hannah Bailey. And what a thoughtful and multi-layered conversation we've got on our hands this week. Always thought it would be, to be honest, because over the years, Hannah's carved out a singular career for herself in the skate and snow industries as a photographer, writer, communications specialist, and all-round creative powerhouse. Yes, we are in lifer territory for this one, which regular listeners will recognise as my description of somebody who's been in this industry for years and who has, by dint of basically following their own interests and passions, created an influential and fulfilling role for themselves. Perennially popular, these episodes, because I think people are always really interested in how people like me and Hannah end up with these frankly odd jobs that we've got. And Hannah in particular has done this completely on her own terms, and in the process has quietly helped bring about a sea change in the way that women's skateboarding and women in action sports generally are perceived. Now, because we're friends, I've watched on proudly over the years as Hannah's career has gone from strength to strength. But I must say, until we chatted for this, I never realised quite how intentional it all was. And I think that's the value of these episodes of the podcast and of this particular conversation with Hannah, how your own take and a vision of the inclusivity of action sports enables you to, ignore the usual career paths, make your own way, and help change the status quo while you're at it, which is what Hannah's done. Plenty of depth and food for thought in this one. I'll be back at the end for Housekeeping Corner. But in the meantime, here's me and Hannah Bailey. Enjoy. This is it. It's happening. This is.
It's actually happening.
But literally, this is it. Literally happening. How you doing? You're right. When was the last time we saw each other? I was trying to remember.
I would say it was probably in London. I was going to say there probably a few months ago, but that's no chance because somehow the past 6 months have really gone into a whole other time zone for us, haven't they? So I'm going to say maybe February, January?
Yeah, maybe. But even then I was trying to think. I couldn't really remember if it was this year or not, because obviously we did loads of stuff last year. I mean, I was in Japan for most of January and February, so I missed ISPO and all that.
So yeah, I definitely missed you in Japan. So it must have been late last year in London. That'll have been it. But it's so hard to say, isn't it? Because the world has completely changed, and the way we're kind of recording time and our memories and what we're up to, and everything's changed since then. And also the way we're sort of connecting with each other. I can almost feel like we might have seen each other not that long ago, having spoken so much about doing the podcast and trying to make it happen.
Yeah, it has been a while actually, isn't it? I think I think I might have first asked you to do this, or maybe even last year, and you've been avoiding it. But
it's funny you say that, Matt, because I was thinking about that, and in my head I was thinking, when Matt says to me, are you avoiding me? Are you ghosting me on doing the podcast? And I'm like, no, I'm just busy. I'm, juggling all my projects, which, as you know, I've got multiple things going on, which I'm sure we'll get into. And I was like, deep down, I realised, yeah, of course I'm apprehensive about doing this podcast, because you look at the people that have been on it, even just the recent podcast with like Christina as an astronaut and surfer, and Mario from POW, and Leo, the amazing skater. And then I thought, where do I fit into this story? But if I can chat to you and somebody listens out there who's thinking, all right, there's ways to get into this industry that are quite accessible. And if you're passionate about something, you can find all these different avenues in this outdoors industry that we're in. If it can encourage someone, and open that door for them, then I think that's kind of the success of it. And I thought, well, I'm willing to kind of put myself out there and hopefully tell my story, or tell some of my stories through this, that maybe open that door for someone, or create that avenue. Because they always say you have to see it to believe it, or you have to hear it to believe it. And I think a lot of people, that could help a lot of people, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I mean, I did that 1% for the Planet podcast, and I was the same. You know, he's had like Jeremy Jones, Yvonne Chenard, Caroline Gleick, however you say it. Sorry, Caroline. You know, it's quite a list. And James, who's probably listening, so hello, James. And then he's like, "Do you want to come on this podcast?" And I was the same. I was a bit like, I mean, thanks, but I don't really see where I fit into that role called people, really. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, you've just described exactly why I was really interested in speaking to you, A, but B, I mean, I get to choose. So, and you know, it's kind of about interesting stories, isn't it? And it's really nice, very selfishly, when I can speak to my friends as well, because, you know, can kind of relax a little bit. Although it's always pretty relaxed, but you know what I mean? Not that I'm saying that's the only reason I asked you to come on.
We're just having a friendly catch up. No, I agree. And it's a reason that I'm happy to do it as well. And I think it can be really difficult to tell your story, especially when you're someone who's worked behind the scenes. And I work hard behind the scenes to push other people's stories and champion, like whether it's like the women in skate or kind of underrepresented skateboarders or people within the industry. And I'd much rather be in that position than putting myself out there. And I think that is maybe the sort of personality I am. And I think also that's probably why I picked up a camera in the first place. Well, it definitely is why I went to a skate park, and I was kind of scared and feeling insecure about my abilities within it. But I found with a camera, I could go to these places. I could help these skaters tell their stories, and I could kind of put my time and energy, passion into that area. So yeah, it's quite funny when you're then the camera's turned on us as behind the scenes people, or the microphone is turned on us. I think maybe we're getting better as a collective with that, because I read a lot more interesting stories with photographers and people behind the scenes than maybe I'd read before. But I think that's just a matter of people being interested in it as well, especially on the side of like women who shoot skateboarding, for example. There's just more interest in knowing who we are and what we're up to, and collectively we're all excited for that kind of opportunity to tell our story. But yeah, it's definitely it's not the position I'm certainly used to.
Yeah, it's funny that, isn't it? Because one of the things I spoke to James about, I mean, you know, like, it's interesting that you're saying like there's almost this tendency to think, well, my story's not that interesting, which is certainly what I think and thought when people ask me to do other bits. I've done a couple of bits recently. But one of the things I spoke to James about on that 1% for the Planet podcast, which has come up quite recently, he was like, how do you pick the guests? And I think there's always that temptation in our industry to sort of venerate the professional athletes, isn't there? And kind of like, you know, think that those are the most interesting stories, because that's essentially the direction that the industry's pointing at. You know, the industry invests all its money in those people, and promotes those people, and and obviously that's fine, because they're amazing at what they do, which is the main reason that we're all here. But and certainly when I started the podcast, I mean, I didn't like just pick the big name athletes from the beginning. I was quite, you know, set upon trying to pick the interesting stories. But it was I definitely did do that. I definitely was a bit like, oh, I need to get like name X, Y, and Z on there, you know. And recently I've kind of realized like I actually just don't need to do that, because those people often aren't that interesting. You know, probably heresy to say that, but often they're not. I do say that from the position of somebody that spent 30 years interviewing professional action sports athletes. Feel fairly qualified to say that. And people, like you say, there is an appetite to learn more about the other stories that are floating around, and ultimately it just comes down to what you think as somebody with an outlet like I've got with this, like what an interesting story is. And I just realized that I get to choose. So
but I always think that's a really good point as well, is that, you know, the industry that we're in, whether you're talking surfing, snowboarding, or skateboarding, which I do think that this is a very, very relevant comment for, is that they can be quite isolating for a lot of people to get involved in, and they're not the most accessible in many ways. And I think that's always been something that I've been fueled with, that has fueled my work, and that is kind of making these lifestyles or activities or sports, whatever you want to call them, accessible, because there's such a big thing with imposter syndrome in the action sports industry, I think, or in any industry, but maybe personally I felt it coming into the industry, or there's been elements of it that I've had to fight and kind of put in a cupboard and ignore. And that is that, I'm not going to be the professional athlete. I love snowboarding. I love splitboarding. I can do these activities. I'm very lucky in that I can get out in the backcountry, and I can go down a black run. I've worked hard to get to that stage. With skateboarding, I've got 3 tricks that I pull out the bag every now and then, and I worked hard to get there, but I still can't kickflip, or my ollie is a smallie. But why should that stop me from being in this industry? Okay, it's going to stop me from being a professional skater. That is totally fine, and I'm not here to try and be that. But it should certainly not stop you from finding another avenue within the industry or within the sport that you're passionate about. And I think sometimes it can be very off-putting, and I felt it in snowboarding as well, that sort of imposter feeling. But I think you can find your own route and path in it, and especially I love the idea of making these things more accessible for people. I love showing the little stories of skaters who, whether it's like the Snaggle Rats in Edinburgh, who are like a young crew of 5 or 6-year-old skaters that I got to shoot earlier this year, the end of last year. There goes my time again. And showing, getting, promoting what they're doing to show young people, not just young girls, that they can skate, so you can, and they're just dropping in the bowl, or they're just pushing around. They don't need to do 1,000,001 tricks to inspire. In fact, they just need to be on a skateboard and then get on the TV, and that's the kind of the secret to it, is just showing these accessible routes into the sports that we love. And I think accessibility is really key, and I love being a part of showing that and getting more people into it.
Do you think it's changing generally? Well, there's almost a couple of questions there, actually, because you're talking about, you described your personal experience, which I completely relate to, and I've talked about that quite a lot on the podcast. Talked about that a lot to Christina Cook last week, actually, about that whole stereotype effect, thinking people are judging you, which is like a personal thing. And I definitely suffer from that personally, and have to fight quite hard to push that out of my mind. I mean, interestingly, I find skateboarding to be the least judgmental, and probably surfing to be the most judgmental of all those things. But then, that's the personal thing, which you've just described. But then, then there's like the kind of collective thing, isn't there? Which is, traditionally, these cultures have just told really like one story, which is like a very white, skill-based, California-focused cultural story, haven't they? And if you don't conform to those things historically, if you're not that good, even though it's always like, oh, it doesn't matter like how good you are. I think that's kind of bullshit, because obviously their culture's predicated on showing off. So, but that's been the traditional means of expression in the culture. So the question I would say is like, do you think it's changing? Because I look around, I think personally it kind of is. I think there's loads more. One of the great things about social and like, people being able to make their own content, to wanky words are just used, but like, you don't need those gatekeepers. You don't need to conform to that traditional sort of cultural story. And there's loads of good stuff out there. There's a guy on Instagram,
I agree.
Zero Ego Surfboard Reviews, I think he's called, something like that. And he's like a bit of a kook, self-confessed, doesn't give a shit, just do it. And it's great. There's a girl on Instagram, curvy surfer girl, who's like proudly
totally.
Not a size 8.
I agree.
It's
I do think it's changing. I do think it's like this access to the different ways of communication and the way we can communicate globally and showcase our stories, which is so fantastic. I think personally for me, going back to the very start, is that I didn't come from a background of skiing or snowboarding or skating, or I never did these things when I was younger growing up. So my kind of connection to the culture and understanding and ability in it started at zero as I entered kind of my 20s, and even my later 20s for skating. And when I found snowboarding in my early 20s, that was like a pivotal change for me for kind of what I felt was important in life, and really feeling a connection to people, a connection to nature, and just wanting to work in the industry. And that was kind of where I got my, my passion and my spark to get into the industry. But really, it was seeing it differently, I think, because there's a way that these sports have been kind of showcased, like you say, focused on like a particular marketing, a particular demographic. And I think when I got into skateboarding, for example, and in particular, I looked around and I thought, well, I've never been in this before, so I don't have this kind of set way that I need to capture it, photograph it, push it, or anything kind of connected to seeing it in a sort of thrasher sense. And I saw it in this kind of brand new way of, well, these are really inspiring stories. These are really inspiring visuals of women and girls in particular, and kind of underrepresented skaters. And I want to show these to the world because I think that this is a really amazing tool for questioning how we represent women in the media in particular. And I had a kind of personal, although I didn't have a personal connection when I was younger to skateboarding, snowboarding, surfing, I felt a much more, I had definitely felt the effect of how women were represented in the media. And that was a massive thing for me. Was growing up, there was this visual of what I should be when I grow up, to be when I grow into a woman, what I should look like. It was what I should look like more than what I should be. It wasn't anything about my ability. It was about how I looked. And that really came from how I felt magazines portrayed women back in the 90s, and what was important, and what we really should be focused on as girls turning into women. And so I kind of felt like when I got into when I found snowboarding, I found this whole other world that was really speaking to me, that said, you can do things. It's not about how you look. We're all part of the same community. And I was really inspired. And the same with skateboarding. I was very inspired by these women that were skating, and they were all different shapes and sizes and ethnicities. But at the beginning, nobody was really showcasing their stories, even in the core media, in a sense. There was a lot of content, and the magazines were really for boys and men, and they weren't showing these women and girls that were skating. And I felt like, well, not only do I want to try and get more of these stories shown in core media, but actually more so in the mainstream media, because I guess my personal story connected to wanting to change that for the next generation coming up, so that they would look in magazines and go, wow, look at that. I want to be Leo, or I want to be Samaria, or I want to be, whoever it is. But these are people doing amazing things. And it's not just about how they look. Well, they all look different, and that is how humans are. And that is so important, which I think was something that I was missing in my kind of pivotal years as I grew up. And so it is a very personal mission. And just coming back to what you were saying about, is it changing the accessibility? I think it is, because we've got social media channels that are showing us the different stories. There's a lot more coverage in the media, which is not just stereotypical, the same old stories, the same athletes, or the same kind of faces being shown. But it is cool to show lots of different faces now, and it's a shame to make it about it being a trend or about it being cool, but it it is a great thing that that door has been opened, and I think we've waited long enough for it.
So that was a conscious thing then, from when you first started documenting skateboarding, snowboarding through photography. That was something that you actively thought. You thought, like, I'm gonna try and sort of subvert this cultural norm that we have in the way that women are represented.
Yeah, it sounds a bit crazy looking back, but 100% the whole time I had to, I guess, because a lot of my work in whether it's from a journalistic or photographic point of view, with capturing the stories of women in this industry, in particular skateboarding, because of it's not a job. It's always been a side project, a side hustle, a passion project, as we call it. Because of that, it's always been about, I guess, this kind of selfish personal mission that I've had, which I felt like, I think if you find what you're passionate about and what you believe in, then if you can put your energy into that to make a change, then that's probably a good way to live your life, a good way to do your work. And definitely in this case, yes, I picked up a camera. The first time I picked up a camera to shoot skateboarding was when I went to Malmo in 2012. I was working for DC Shoes at the time, and I was doing their PR. So my bread and butter has always been communications, PR for brands and athletes events in the industry. And then on the side, I get a call from Lucy Adams, who was skating for DC at the time, and she said, do you want to come to Malmo with us? We're going a little group of skaters. It's me, it's Becky Jacks, it's Stephanie Nerding. We just wondered if you'd like to come along. And I hadn't even learnt to drop in by this time, but Lucy knew I was a passionate photographer, and I hadn't turned the camera on a skateboarder yet. And I was straight away like, yes, I'd love to come along and join you for this trip. So I went over, and we had an amazing time in Copenhagen and Malmo, and I just shot rolls and rolls of film. I wasn't on digital back then, even though it was 2012. And the whole time I was thinking, where can I put this story? Because I am so inspired by this group of women and the way they skate and the way they are. And I just think they're really great role models, and I want to champion them and get them in the media. And so the whole time I'm shooting it, I'm connecting, like, where can I push this piece? Where can I put these photos? Not because I want my photos pushed out there, but because I want them to be featured, because not many people there was no one else there taking their photo. There should have been someone else there who'd maybe had a digital camera and was shooting for multiple years, but nobody else was following them around. So there's me following them around. And I think that those photos we got on Dazed Digital, and I think we did another piece for Women's Health. So straight away I could see that there was an interest in this in the mainstream media, and that we could kind of infiltrate. If we could take those pages or that online placement that maybe was going to go to some sort of Kardashian, or a piece about what to do if you have cellulite or how to paint your nails, if we were taking that away and we're putting in content of people like Lucy Adams, that was kind of my aim, because that's what I would have much rather seen and learned from when I was younger, and just for society to learn from as well, I think.
So at what age did you become aware of that societal pressure that you're talking about? It sounds like it was quite a significant pressure that you felt from quite a young age.
I would say it was when I was 14. And I can say that because I've got an older brother, and I spent all my childhood running around like a human alongside him, climbing trees, playing football, playing with dolls as well, a bit of everything. And then when I hit 14, something changed. I think my brother had left home to go to university, and I was in the house more by myself with my own thoughts. And also kind of that's when society starts creeping in. Maybe you start buying magazines, you're noticing more how women are represented, or the way things change at school. And I think I can't really put my finger on exactly what it was, but it was a general infiltration of media and content around. Now, obviously back then we didn't have a phone, it didn't have social media, so I don't know, and I imagine it's even more difficult now for a 14-year-old girl. There's lots of content out there that's great, but there's also lots of content that's not so great, and maybe they'll see the not so great stuff, which is a whole other conversation, I think.
Well, it's relentless, isn't it? You know, it's relentless for anybody. It's relentless for, you know, anyone that's aware of their own self-image and, you know, has a view on that. It's difficult. So yeah, at that age, formatively, it's unceasing, isn't it? You know, to try and pick your way through that.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, as a photographer in this day and age, and if originally I was taking on kind of the traditional media, that was almost quite an easy task in some ways, you know. I'm thinking, here's a list of traditional media that I'm going to try and infiltrate with this content that I believe to be positive and inspiring. And I set off on that as kind of like a personal mission, and of course in many ways a professional mission, because it is what I do now. You know, I'm finally in a stage of, you know, getting paid as a photographer in the niche area that I'm in, and actually I'm supported by Getty for this particular subject matter. So it's really great to say that now. But yeah, it was a battle or like a journey. I'm not going to say a battle. It's not a battle. It was an amazing and fun, and has been a really amazing, fun journey for 8 years of doing this. But an important thing in my mind going forwards is that I want younger people to see that they can make a viable career at being a photographer of skateboarding, and you know, in particular girls to see that. And so I've got to take it seriously in order for the industry to take it seriously, and for it to be a job that exists. And that's kind of an amazing position to be in, I think, but quite a lot of pressure. But I think that it's something that I'd like to push my work towards now, is kind of helping create that, where at one point I was thinking, do I have to take on the social media kind of challenge now? How do I help here? And I'm like, no. That's kind of, you just got to organically let that be. Or where do I fit into this industry that is like really buzzing, and all of the magazines are now kind of proactively doing their own content around the skaters, and that's brilliant. It's like it exists. And I think it's quite funny because I have conversations with like Mimi Knoop, obviously legendary skater, and with Kim Woozy, who was the founder of Mafia TV and is just an amazing pioneer of the scene and really taking things forward, and works with Skate Like a Girl now. We kind of have conversations about, you know, we have to recognise that the scene has changed, and that a lot of the work we've done is kind of happened. So where do we fit in now? And we have discussions about this, which is great. It's a great community to be part of, a little work community, and full of inspiring ladies just kind of working out what we should do.
Well, you know, there's always, whatever the change in landscape, there's always a room for substance, isn't there? And there's always a home for substance, sorry. And basically you've done it, your work has substance, and is, as you've clearly demonstrated, is considered, and there's a point to it. And I think, like, if you do that you're always going to find outlets. You're always going to that's always going to be interesting to people, you know, no matter what medium you communicating that through, whether it's social media or print back in the day, or whatever. You know, there's obviously a lot of vapid sort of surface gloss content out there right now, which gets a lot of attention. But I think substance is will never go out of fashion. Let's put it that way. And I think, you know, that's kind of what you brought to it. One question that I've got about, you know, you mentioned the fact that you snowboarding and then skateboarding kind of gave you a home, as it were, away from the sort of mainstream cultural pressures that you were becoming increasingly aware of. Did that continue, or did you find that sometimes you came up against those same pressures in these supposedly alternative cultures at any point?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because straight away I want to say no, that I haven't felt that way. I've always felt at home in it. But I've been very lucky with both snowboarding and skating in the industry as a whole to have really amazing mentors throughout my time working in it and just being a part of it. And I've surrounded myself by the good in the industry. So I don't think I could be sitting here after 12 years of working in it and say, I wouldn't be sitting here after 12 years working in it if it wasn't for the fact that it's still fueling me and still inspiring me almost exactly as much as it did the day I started, or in 2012 when I got my first kind of chance to write for Cooler, or in 2015 when I went to work with Skatistan, or everything. I've had such an amazing journey with it, and I think that I'm also quite good with my work too, and recognize in my work and how I work that I need to mix things up, or I have a lot of different plates spinning, as you know, and that means that I've always got something that's fueling and inspiring me, and I choose wisely kind of where I put my time and my energy, even if I do take on too many things. But yeah, I don't have anything that I can say that that has really kind of turned me off the industry, because if there has been anything, whether it's been a million and one no's, of course I've had a million and one no's for content, or not being interested in it, or magazines not being interested in it, or brands saying no to kind of like pitches that we put together to try and kind of do some content projects. There's been so many no's, but it just fuels me to keep on going to get the yeses. So I think that says a lot for the community that we're in, and for especially the skate community that I'm lucky to be part of. Just really supportive. Like, we have a group at the moment that we formed during lockdown. Me and Kim and Sarah Houston, who started Yeah Girl Skateboarding, we decided we'd start this group where we bring together all the women behind the scenes, whether they're photographers or videographers, just to chat it out and talk about what we're doing, and do that over Zoom. And I think that's been a really great thing in lockdown, is realizing the strength of the community and the strength of the people that you work around, because they're still there. I'm still working with them. I'm still fueled, and I've got an ideas list that goes on, and I keep on dipping into. So yeah, actually, over, we had the initial lockdown, and then we had the lockdown kind of now, in a sense. In Scotland in particular, we're only allowed to be in one household and can't visit our friends. And in between those two lockdowns, there was an idea that I've had on my list for years. I'm a listographer. I like making lists of ideas, and I keep all my books and my notebooks, and I go back through them to see if there's anything that I'd like to take forward. And there's some things that just stay in the notebooks, and there's some things that I know I want to do because they appear for years and years. And there was this project idea that I had around, it was kind of called like a working title of Forget California, about showing the potential of Scotland and what's here in the eyes of a skater. And so during the two lockdowns, I managed to get Helen along, who's an amazing skater from London, who skates for Vans as well. She came up the road to Inverness, and I picked her up, and we travelled around the northwest section of Scotland to find skate spots. Obviously, there's not many skate spots in the northwest of Scotland, because it's mostly kind of moorlands, hills, beaches, and a lot of kind of cracks and not many curbs. But yeah, we managed to get out and shoot a little series and be out on the road together. And it's amazing, because she's, to hang out with someone like Helena, who's part of the community, who's so up for coming up and getting these ideas out there. And with that one in particular, we just kind of took our chance, and she came up to Scotland. We had a good trip and got some good photos. But I think that I'm just saying that because I think that just to show I don't think my passion and enthusiasm has waned much if I'm going back into the list from years ago and calling upon my community to help me make these things happen. So it's a special thing to be part of, and I feel lucky to call this my job.
Have you always done that? Have you always like kept those creative records? Because I do that. I am a compulsive list maker, and I write in notebooks just for the sake of writing in them. Really, it's quite a strange thing to say, but I've kind of realised that like I make notes. Often I can't really even read them, and I do use them in the same way that you're talking about. Go back, look at the ideas, and I totally recognise that thing you're saying of like those recurring ideas that you have, that you end up. You know, I've always been a big believer in like just let ideas marinate, like, and try and work out when the right time to do them is. But I've kind of worked out that for me the notebook thing is almost just part of, I'm going to say, feeling creative. I'm not even going to say like being creative. I'm going to say like, you know, part of that process to almost like trick yourself into doing it. Is that something
I completely
do you know what I'm getting at? Have you
I totally think that way, because just when you were talking about how you used notebooks there, I was thinking it is a creative outlet of mine, and it took me a while to find what creativity meant to me and whether I was creative. Because when I was at school, I was, you know, we're all put in our corners, and I was put in the corner of the sporty ones.
Yeah.
So like I do PE, and that's what they consider. They asked me to be in the hockey team, and I say no, and I decided to do table tennis instead. So I was kind of like an alternative, but they put me in the sporty area, and they wouldn't let me do art because I drew this really terrible picture of my backpack. I remember I must have been about 12 or 14 or something in art class, you know, before you decided what classes you were going to carry forward. And yeah, we had to draw a picture of our own backpack, and I drew it, and I was so proud of it. I was like, that's not bad, you know, I actually managed to draw something there. And I remember the teacher just being like, oh yes, art's not for everyone. I was like, what? Oh, okay. So that ruled it out. And then on the other side, I kind of had my dad saying, oh, you know, you're not an artist, you're not creative, there's no point in doing all that. So I thought that not being good at art meant I wasn't creative. And it took me years to work out after I'd left school that I was, everybody's creative. Everyone has a way to creativity and an outlet to it.
Well,
notepads really helped me with that.
Another one of those pressures that we're talking about, though, isn't it? Or like not even pressure like conformity of something you have to unlearn as you get older, or relearn.
Yeah.
You know, like the concept of creativity being individual to the person, and it's actually fine to try and express that in different ways. Like, you know, which is what we're talking about with this notebook thing, because it, you know, that's what, you know, morning pages. Do you know what that is? Like, can't remember her name. It's Julia somebody or other. It's really famous. It's part of the Artist's Way, and that's just a book which is about like helping people realize what their own creativity is. And morning pages is a really famous thing, whereby, you know, like loads of famous creative people, directors, artists swear by it. You get up in the morning, you basically like free associate on a page whatever's in your head, and you don't even read it really. You don't even do anything with it, but it's like, it's almost like the act of allowing yourself to just free associate is a habit that if you get into will help you get to the point where you don't judge yourself on whether what you try to create is any good or not, because that's another big big thing, isn't it? You know, like, oh, I can't do that because I'm no good at it, which is basically what you were just talking about with what your art teacher said to you. But that isn't the point of creativity, is it? The point of creativity is to do it, is to do the thing. Exactly.
I really love thinking about what creativity is. And obviously it comes in all shapes and forms, but I always think, and I've recently thought of it, especially over lockdown, is like, well, creativity is when you're showing it and you're putting it out there. Creativity doesn't exist until you put it out there, whether it's in a photo, whether it's in words, whether it's in a video. It's just an idea before then. So I think maybe, yeah, these notebooks are ideas, and then I'm gonna use that to help my creativity, or to make something creative and put it out there, because there's so much amazing stuff out there that you see that really, it fuels my work. And it would be amazing it's exciting to think that you can add to that creative, colourful energy that's going around the world. But yeah, it doesn't exist until you put it out there. But I think with the notepads, there is that element of putting these ideas that you're then gonna put out there in a creative form. But for me also, it's a matter of organizing all my thoughts, because I do juggle a lot of things, and I have, you know, I always say to people that I don't have a job role, but I have a job topic. I work in a topic rather than a role, because, you know, I'm a photographer, journalist, working communications within the roles of outdoor sports, environmentalism linked to that more recently, and accessibility for people in the outdoor sports sector, and getting more women and girls into it, like specifically. So they're my topics, and I'll take on every single role, or any role that is within that. And I think that people that work in the industry know that very well. It's kind of how we work, isn't it? Like you, for example, you're just like that. You're a multitasker in the industry, and have been throughout your career. And I think it's a really great way to be, because it keeps you really fueled. Well, I find it's a really great way to be, but I do need a notepad to write down my different thoughts. Otherwise, I will maybe at some point forget some things, which does happen.
Yeah, totally. I came back from France. I'm not joking. It took me a day to write my to-do list. Like the first day back, it took me all day, and it was funny because I had to write a load of lists to actually write the main list. Because what you've just described is like all the different areas. Yeah, you're right. You know, I obviously do quite a lot of different things, all self-inflicted, and if I have to really like sort of be like, okay, right, there's that, like bang, 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 okay, and then try and marshal it really. And I just have to try and be really organised, or else I haven't got a chance really. And I also get quite mentally overwhelmed if I don't do that. Which is why I always work on a holiday, which is bizarre, because, you know, it's like otherwise I think I'm just sort of saving up a bit of stress at some point. Try to get a bit better at that though. But I think it's really necessary if you're going to try and have like you're talking about, that type of unconventional path that you've followed, and try and do it successfully. You know, what I see about you is, yeah, you're like really creative, you're really organized. I mean, I don't know, and I don't even really mean in the traditional sense, just mean, you know, you've got a handle on what you need to do to do all the things that you want to do. But the other thing I would say is you make good decisions, and you kind of alluded to that earlier when you said that you knew when you needed to move on. I think you said something like that, because, you know, I'm a big believer that like life is about forward movement, and that just equals decision making really. You know, I always think that if you're stuck, just make a decision, whatever that decision is. Yeah. And that at least will give you some forward movement, and will change the situation that you're in. And you know, you've always, because you mentioned your, you know, let's call it day job, the communication stuff. You know, we've worked together on loads of stuff over the years on that side of things. You know, I offered you a job at one point, which you turned down, but that was a really good decision. And that's what I mean when I talk about that. And that's why I almost bring that up, because, you know, when I look back on that, I was probably like 6 years ago or something. And that was a really good decision, because you ended up doing all the things that you wanted to do. So I guess the question is that a conscious thing? Are you in control of that as well? Like because, you know, you've worked for Skateistan, you're working for Patagonia right now. You've had some pretty great roles in the industry, but you always seem to know when to move on. which I think is a really important thing to know, that if you're gonna maintain your own interest and momentum.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I mean, it's the first time I've really thought about that before. But yeah, in some ways just want to say, well, I've been very lucky. And luck is an element, the timing when the roles come up. But it's also about making these decisions at the right time. And I always think about the philosopher Alan Watts, and he talks about decision making, because as humans, we're not very good at making decisions. And there's a simple reason for that. And there's a simple way to make decisions. And what he says is that there's 1,000,001 different decisions you have to make every day, or different variables or outcomes for each decision. So it's almost an impossible task. So the only way that you can make a decision and make the right decision is if you've decided you've made the right decision. It's like as simple as that. Like a wave crashing, it crashes the way it crashes. It doesn't overthink it. It's just been and it's done its thing. And I think maybe my mentality, or maybe the speed that I like to do my work and just keep going with it and keep fuel with it, means that I make decisions and I don't overly ponder them. Because if you do look backwards, you're making up a story, or look too far forward. They're all just stories. But if you're just in the moment and you think, this feels right to me, this is the right decision right now, then that's all you have, really. And I think that is a really good way to, and of course I don't always do that, sometimes I ponder over, oh, should I have had that for dinner last night, should I have this for dinner, it can go on and on in my brain. But yeah, I'm thinking about the decision with Skatestan in particular, and how all that worked out, which I find is quite a kind of funny story, in that I had been doing my communications day job. I'd started Neon Stash as, really it was me going freelance, but I gave it this kind of agency vibe back in 2012. And after 2 years of working freelance in a communications role for DC, for Capita, for other brands and things that were coming through London, I had this idea in my brain that I should go and work at an agency to get some experience of how a PR agency runs. Because if I maybe want to go down that route with Neon Stash, I should get a feel for it. So I'm going to see if I can go and work at one of the big industries in London. And I got a job with Ben Bailey over at 360 at the time, and he was working at part of Exposure, a really big agency that has like Nike and Converse and all sorts of big projects. And I was working on stuff on Adidas, and working alongside him was really great. And Raoul, who started the agency, and I definitely took in a lot about what it meant to run an agency, and kind of realised maybe that wasn't for me. Maybe I wasn't going to go down that path, which is as important, realising what's not right for you. But when it came to Skatestan, I was in-house at 360. I was sitting at my desk. I'd been there for 6 months, doing the agency thing. And I got a call from my friend, David and Louise, who live out in Cambodia. I'd put them in touch with Skatestan I'd been watching Skatestan as a charity and just thought it was an amazing thing. And I'd found their generic email address and said to David and Louise that they should reach out because they also work in Cambodia. They ended up building a tuk-tuk skate ramp. Because Louise and David, my friends over in Cambodia, they had a building charity called Building Trust International. So they teamed up as NGOs over there and created this tuk-tuk skate ramp. And I got this call from David in February 2015 saying, oh, hey Han, Tony Hawk's coming to Cambodia to build a skateboard with Skatestan, and we're going to be building it with them. Do you want to come over and help? And I was like, yes. Like, obviously I'll be there. And then I just go through to Ben and I say, pretty much, I'm like, Ben, I'm off. I've got to go. Tony Hawk's in Cambodia. Just going to go build this skateboard. And, I'd been covering skateboarding and the stories of women in skateboarding in the UK, which was quite a small community at the time. And that had been my experience so far. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, right, I'm going to go to Cambodia and see what Tony Hawk's up to with skate stand with his skateball. And it was a decision. Like, there was no decision really. It was just, yes, I'm going, but that's a decision in itself. And a couple of weeks later, I was on my way to get the flight, and I get a call from David saying Tony Hawk's not coming anymore. There was a long story about it being cancelled because there was meant to be this TV show. Anyway, I went regardless because I thought this is amazing to get to go and see this skate project in Cambodia, and to go and hang out with David and Louise and just get to travel around. I'd never been to Cambodia before. And when I got there, it really opened my eyes to the power of skateboarding for communities, because I'd seen it in the UK on a small scale, and I think it's as admirable. But over in Cambodia, it was just incredible to meet the staff at the Phnom Penh skate school that Skatestan had there. In particular, a skater and who is now the general manager of the charity over there, Tin. She was one of the first female skaters in Cambodia, and she really had to push hard past a lot of stereotypes and feelings in the community that maybe she should be working elsewhere, not skateboarding, to learn it and to become a figurehead for it. And she's inspired the next generation, lots of girls in the city, to take up skateboarding, and lots of girls around the world. So yeah, going over to Cambodia and meeting the charity there, and I was on a trip to a skate bowl in the jungle with them. They happened to be going on one the weekend that I arrived, and they invited me in the van. Tin said, "Do you want to come? We're going to the jungle. There's a skate bowl." And that was another moment of yes. And of course, that's timing and quite lucky, but I'd already said yes to making it over to
you put yourself in a position to be asked, didn't you?
Yeah, and then we're just in the jungles skating the skateball, and Talia, who worked for the charity at the time, said there was a communications role coming up. Maybe I should apply for it. So the timing on everything was just perfect, and yeah, getting the opportunity to work for Skatestan was really a dream come true and a dream job, and it will always be the dreamiest job I've ever had and could have had, and was an amazing 2.5 years with them. The timing was really perfect. It almost feels a little bit of fate that came across there. But it was really the first time I could work full time on this mission of pushing such inspirational stories and really giving a lot of purpose to my work, where it felt purposeful before. Even, working with DC and with the Quick brands, there was always an element of purpose, because I believed in these activities being really positive outlets for people mentally, and in a sense of the positive content it was putting out there. But with Skatestand, it's that whole other level. I mean, you've spoken with Ollie for the podcast. I think a lot of people are aware of them through the film, and just knowing the work that they do in Afghanistan and Cambodia and South Africa, and getting to go to all of those skate schools and to meet the little girls and the women skating was, I don't really know how to put it into words, which is quite rare for me.
So why did you leave there? How come the time was right? I'm not asking you to go into the reasons for the specifics, but I just mean, again, on this like decision making theme.
There was a couple of reasons, and of course it's a viable question because it was a dream job, and it was really difficult to walk away from it. But one was the location of working in Berlin that wasn't right for me personally, and I'd spoken to Ollie and the charity kind of early about that. But the other one was that I think that for me, I wanted to work wider across all of the outdoor sports, and I have a big passion for snowboarding and getting, going outside and accessible adventure, and that was something that my energy was really going towards. And I felt like my time with Skatestan had kind of come to an end in that, sitting in the Berlin office, and I'd worked on 6 fundraising campaigns with them, and had gone around opened 2 skate schools, and been around all of the skate schools to meet with the staff and everything. So it was an amazing time, and we got a lot out of it. And but it was just time for me to move on personally. The great thing is I joined the UK board earlier this year, so I work with them on kind of raising awareness of the charity here in the UK, and I think that's something that I just want to. I think I'm fit in a better place to do that and to help the charity in that sense. So it's great to still be connected and still be able to help what they're doing, because I truly believe it's one of the most special things out there in the world. So
it's incredible what they've done, and it just keeps getting more and more impressive, doesn't it? So creatively run as well. You know, all the ideas and the new ways of getting the message out there are always just really clever, aren't they? And, you know, really well thought out. So can we chat a bit about your photography as well? Because, you know, you mentioned that you'd been into it since before you started shooting skateboarding, but you also said something really interesting, which was that when you were talking about skateboarding, you liked almost like the barrier of the camera, like being between you and the environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So
yeah.
is
and
that,
I mentioned that earlier.
Is that something with photography per se?
Yeah, I think that came to mind earlier because I've been thinking a lot about the kind of role of photographers and how we are as people, or how we become photographers. I'm quite fascinated by it. Like I've been rereading over and over Susan Sontag's on photography, and it's funny, she kind of talks a lot about like photographers as kind of people who are, you know, to collect photographs is to collect the world. She says that they're kind of collectors, or they're hiding because they don't want to be in the photo, or they don't want to be in that position. They're showing their vision. They're showing this one thing they believe. It's got me really fascinated. But yeah, definitely it made me realise through reading that book that I was really... Well, Lucy invited me along to Sweden, for example. She was throwing me in at the deep end, and I couldn't have dropped in the deep end, so I took the photo of her dropping in the deep end in a sense. So I think there is the element of hiding behind the camera, but then finding a home there.
Yeah.
I think that's important, because at first you can be hiding, but then you could be taking loads of rubbish shots, and then you're thinking, well, I don't want to be doing this. But I found by hiding behind the camera to see and go to these places, I also found my creative outlet, which is so important, because I don't know how long I've been photographing, and how I haven't had cameras all my life, or had, you know, I didn't do photography at school or go to university to do photography. There's no formal training in my photography. So I really do see it as a creative outlet. And actually, it's only recently that I've really started calling myself a photographer, which has made my friend Liz Seabrook, a fellow photographer, laugh a lot. She even said it. We were on a trip between the two lockdowns. She came up to Scotland, and she kind of turned around to me and said, "You finally accepted you're a photographer now. Thank goodness." And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm calling myself a photographer. It's I've got to that point. I think that was because I'd come in from hiding behind the camera, finding a creative outlet through it, that I didn't want to just say, oh, I'm a photographer, or just being a bit coy about it in a sense. I can't exactly explain why that is, but it has taken me a long time to... Maybe I also didn't want to put pressure on it. I think that's it as well.
I was going to say that, because it's a way of controlling the way you perceived it, but also, you know, it's just like a lot of baggage that comes with those labels. You know, I would never call myself a writer, even though I've, you know, spent my adult life making a living from writing. But, you know, it's just a lot of baggage with that. It's just, if you say to somebody you're a writer, they go, "Oh, what have you written?" And if I say, like, well, yeah, I wrote an interview with Elias Elhart last month for Snowboard Journal, it's always a bit like, okay, you know. So I just rather not go there personally. I just think, I don't know, what do I say? I think my stock line is I piss about for a living, which I think is probably fair enough. But but it is a voice.
I think I need to find a stock line, because sometimes people ask me and I kind of say 1,000,001 words that sort of sum up what I do. It can be a really difficult one sometimes to summarize it, but maybe that's a good thing as well.
It's quite a British thing though, isn't it? To not just own it, not just own your shit, not just be like, well, I'm a X, Y, and Z, and probably it's probably a bit annoying. A friend of mine, well, a friend of ours, Ewan, always, we always used to, this is like excessively modest, extremely, incredibly talented at everything he does, and we were always a bit like, your level of modesty is as annoying as arrogance ultimately, because it's like equally not truthful in some ways. You know what I mean? Like,
definitely, yeah.
But I definitely think that's quite a Britsy thing. So you also,
I think the other thing with sorry, Matt, just thinking about the kind of not calling yourself a photographer or kind of playing your story down. I think for me and a lot of people, it can be about expectations as well, and just removing those expectations, which obviously is also pressure. But I think that's almost been quite a good thing. I don't take it back. I would never go back in time and say that I would do it any other way, because it's not really my personality to start shouting about being this, that, and the other thing. But also, it's just nice to not have that expectation, and everything's just an added bonus. I think that's the way I live my life. I believe I'm an optimist, but maybe deep down I'm just like a realist.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I think it's a control thing as well, though. That was the other thing I was going to ask about with the photography and the putting a barrier between yourself and the environment. I've never actually read that Susan Sontag book. It sounds like I need to read that. But does she talk about that? Does she talk about that being a way of controlling the environment and your place in it?
Yeah. Do you know what she does it in two sort of ways? She kind of talks about maybe the sort of awkward characters that might become photographers because they'd rather communicate through their photography, but also they don't have to communicate when they're in a social situation. But I think the more kind of relevant element she talks about is that the photographer has a control over, a visual, which is quite a power to have, but also the caption that you put alongside it. And I'm thinking a lot about that in my work recently, because I think that I've always thought that is what's so great about it. And that's what I take, like I've been talking throughout this podcast, is I take photos because I want to address this particular social structure and something that I don't believe. So obviously I'm putting it into a caption state. I'm putting it into a full feature of like kind of my beliefs that this person's inspirational, that this photo is inspirational, which is my belief, but is that everybody's belief? So that is quite a power and quite a kind of assumption to make. And I thought about it a lot this year, and with the Olympics next year, or was going to be this year, and now next year, having skateboarding in it for the first time, I was thinking about where do I fit in and how can I kind of capture the stories of women in skate, or try and get some of that spotlight that is going to go to the Olympics put over on these real stories of women in skate without it being necessarily my caption or just my visual, because I think that maybe the visual can be mine, but maybe the caption can come from the women themselves, and that's where it's got to, and that's what I'm that is what I'm going to do with a project that I've got coming up and coming out next year alongside the Olympics, and I think that's quite empowering feeling. The project itself is called In Balance is Trust, obviously talking about the skateboard itself, but also about the kind of relationship between a visual and the viewer, whether that is the Olympics showing skateboarding in a certain way, or whether that is me taking a photo or a portrait of somebody with their skateboard and saying who they are. No, they can say who they are. They can say what they are. They can say why they like skateboarding, rather than me putting the words on the paper or in their mouth. So I'm really excited for that project and that sort of realization. And I think, reading Susan Sontag on photography helped me get to that place. But I had thought about it in the past. But I have to admit, in some ways, I'd just been kind of on this fast-moving mission that I needed a bit of time to stop and think, is what I'm doing right? Is it helping the community? Should I just be representing and talking about women in skateboarding, because it's such a weird term now. I don't like saying it, although I've said it about 100 times throughout this podcast. But where are we at? I think that's what's so exciting about life at the moment, but also challenging, is that it's changing every week, changing every day. And that's not just related to the kind of current situation, although it is as well. But I want to try and kind of keep what I'm doing valid to how the world is, to try and do right with it in a sense. So I'm excited about this project that I'll launch next year, in line with the Olympics, and just really giving the voice to the real people that are skating, who deserve to tell their stories and deserve to be recognised, whether that's Tin in Cambodia or Yuri in Japan, who films all the Joy and Sorrow films. She's just amazing. She's been skating for so long, and she's kind of 3 feature films in. So it'd be great to have them championed alongside the Olympics, which is going to get I really feel like skateboarding is going to be skateboarding and climbing are going to be really focused on, obviously, at the next Olympics. So it's really trying to make use of it in a good way and divert some of that attention to these real stories, divert some of that attention to Skatestan, to all the good social projects, to the good push, to the hundreds of good projects around the world. And I think I can be helpful, or I hope I can help in that sort of diversion of the attention.
Yeah, I mean, that's the challenge. It's funny though, isn't it? Because the mainstream, I'm not even talking about the Olympics here, I'm just talking about mainstream, just to make the very, very mainstream perception of what we all do is still so weird, isn't it? I mean, like, I was listening to the Adam Buxton podcast, which I absolutely love, I'm sure everyone does, with Zadie Smith the other day, and even on that they were like, made some really disparaging reference to like the adrenaline guys, the Pepsi Max guys, and like, whatever, who gives a shit? But like, I just thought, wow, like, even 2 people that are as culturally attuned as that, like, still think of what is such a rich culture with so, even from this conversation, like what the elements of skate culture that you're interested in and that you champion and that you talked about are so far from that. So far from Skatestan is so far from fuckwits.
Exactly. I think they're always going to exist, this kind of jargon or terminology within the culture we're in. But also, isn't it so exciting that this other side of the culture that is, what's the word I'm going to use for it? So hard. I almost want to say classy, but I definitely don't mean that. It's almost like with more purpose, more substance. That's it, probably. Which has a deeper meaning, has a deeper substance to it. There's still a lot of room to show that, and I think there'll be an amazing appetite for it. When the mainstream public does see this, does learn about Skatestan. I mean, when they learn about it, they're like, "Wow, that exists! That's amazing!" And this stereotypical picture of a teenage boy skating down the street, I don't know, kind of dissolves in their mind, and then they might replace it with this inspiring image of a Afghan girl with her headscarf skating, or and it'd be the same with the Olympics, because it's already going to show both, it's going to show a diversity within skateboarding that's never been seen before, because there's going to be skaters from all over the world skating it, which is quite rare, isn't it? So that's already going to open the door, and then we could there's this kind of potential to open the door to even smaller, less told stories within it, which I think is exciting for all sports, because I don't know that many stories around football that are like that, or basketball, but I'd like to know them, and I'm interested to know them. So I think it's an exciting challenge. Yeah, I really do see it as an exciting challenge.
Yeah, the way you frame that's really nice, actually, because you're right. You get something like the Olympics, which is obviously just like lowest common denominator. Like, you know, for a lot of people that discover skateboarding through the Olympics, obviously they're going to get whacked around the head with like, hey, skateboarding, you know, blah blah, like that mainstream level of coverage. But then, you know, like you say, once those people are kind of go past that first hurdle and then start investigating, then you've got an opportunity, haven't you, to showcase the reality of these cultures in which is obviously what you do with your work, which is brilliant. But that's a really positive way of looking at it, because, you know, the conversation about the Olympics and action sports generally is so like either or, isn't it? It's so like, well, I can't wait. I think it'll be great to be on the biggest platform in the world, to like, this is going to destroy our culture. You know, it's either one of them. So to actually have a more nuanced view is really nice. I was listening to not that I make a habit of re-listening to my own podcasts, but for the book that me and Owen tried to do, I had to re-listen to a bit of the Corey Schumacher episode, and she was really interested on the Olympics because she kind of said, yeah, you know, whatever, they're probably going to fuck up like the way they represent our culture, but equally they mean that our culture has to conform to the actual standards of the real world in terms of, you know, the strides that the mainstream makes in terms of like gender issues, LGBTQ issues. You know, that in a lot of ways we're quite a backward culture on that, in that way, as you can see with the whole debate about like Black Lives Matter, for example, and people like suddenly discovering the concept of privilege, or, you know, going, because so I think there are more nuanced ways of like looking at that, what the influence is going to be. But I really like your kind of, you've already got a plan, which is very characteristic. You know, you're like, yeah, I'm going to go over there and do this, which is great. You know, like, it's,
yeah. Well, I needed the extra year as well, so it was kind of a blessing to have that extra time and to stop and think. I've been running kind of on overdrive with things, and lockdown gave me that space to breathe and stop and think, okay, where can I help? What can I do? Where do I want to put my time? Because we've only got so much time, don't we, each day, and we really feel that. And I think we can put on a lot of pressure to ourselves to get so much done. But really the best thing you can do is sit down and go, right, what am I fueled by? Where is my energy and my skills best spent? And how can I do some good in this world? I think that's like what I always think. Like I said earlier in the podcast, if you can find there's so many things going on in the world. There's so much shit going on that you can't take on every battle. We can't as individual humans. Okay, we could if we all got together and did it as a group, and we are doing that now. But I think individually, and I can only speak for the individual in this podcast, and that is thinking, well, what is my personal story, and what have I been affected by, and where can I kind of jump in to help for the greater good, to make a difference. And we can make our little difference. And I'm not talking about changing the world, because we don't need to change the whole world. There's lots of good in it. It's like, where can I change the little things that have niggled my life? And maybe you can make a little difference. And if not, at least you tried. And I think that's kind of what I'd like to do in my work, and what I'd like to say to other people. If that's kind of, if you're passionate about something, go for it, go down that route, because ultimately you're going to be more satisfied in your work. But maybe you'll do something good, or you'll help someone, you'll help one person or hundreds of people, or help change something, or and I think that's kind of that's important to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it should be important to everyone. And making me think,
yeah.
I mean, I guess I try and do that, but probably not as successfully as I should do, really. It's because it's not easy, is it, to get that balance? And I think you've done a really good job at kind of like following that thread through, you know, and which is really demonstrated by the conversation that we've had, you know, like in the experiences that you've had. Because I didn't quite realize like how intentional the work that you've done has been from the beginning, which is really interesting to hear, you know, which leads me very nicely, not planned, to the final question of the podcast. But what would you like to do, like, ultimately? Because obviously you've created a platform for yourself, you've created a network for yourself, you've created a voice for yourself, and an influence. And obviously I use the word intentional, not calculated, because calculated is a horrible word, but do you have any bigger goals that this is all leading towards?
Yeah, you know, for me, and I think it's probably come across in this podcast, that it's the first time I've really talked about my career in such a format that I really am aware that I'm talking about me, and I did this and this happened and I did this and my thoughts are this and my personal opinion. And I'm also quite an independent person, and I've spent a lot of time kind of traveling around by myself, and I've been independent since I was about 14, just doing my own thing, and that's always been kind of the way that I've lived my life so far. And I think that does come across in my work as well, is that I get together to work with other people, whether it's been on the board with Skatestan, or I also work with POW. I just joined their board as a trustee, and but then I'm a freelancer who works for themselves and has kind of multiple ideas that I do individually. And going forward, and the grand vision would be that I could give all the work I've done and all the experience I've done to the younger generation, to help the next generation of people coming through who want to work in the industry, and give my time to really that side of things. Because I think so far I've never been really that much of a manager, and I never did make Neon Stash into a PR agency where I was hiring lots of people who wanted to get into the industry, which was once a dream. So I'm trying to work out now how I can take my individual work and my individual passion and help kind of more people and be part of something bigger in that sense, and which is something that I'm still working out how I do it. But I think it's just I don't know exactly how I'll do it, but that's what I'd like to do.
Nice. Well, Chit.
But maybe that's like a general feeling of being a freelancer as well, and especially being a freelancer since 2012. And I've dipped in and out of organisations, obviously working with Skatestan and working with Patagonia. And maybe it's also a feeling that I have at the moment, just being by myself in lockdown and kind of not having the events on that we usually would. So it's made me really think. And yeah, for example, with this collective of women in skate that we've got going on, with the all the people behind the scenes that are working in it, that we try and catch up once every couple of months. That's kind of a big topic on our mind, is like, how can we create this viable room for more women to come through and work in it properly as jobs, to get paid right, to get what they deserve within it. And I think that I'd like to commit more of my time in how I work, and to that being something that's there for the future.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense, to almost not formalize, but kind of like take what you've learned and what we've talked about, and actually like consciously work out how it could be a benefit to others, by the sounds of it, and to yourself as well. Like to kind of, not clarify it, but yeah, like be even more intentional than you've been with it, perhaps, which is yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because I think everyone's having those thoughts with this situation. It's definitely given a lot of time for inward thought, hasn't it? And what am I doing in my life, kind of thing. Has it been a positive process generally, that thinking in this way?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, I think lockdown was a good time for reflection, and just this year in general. And I mean, I try and keep positive about everything, but I just want to make sure that I'm not on, not just in a selfish place where it's about my work. And I do think that, with the different organisations I work with, whether it's POW UK or Skatestan, there is a lot of collective good. And maybe that's it. I'm just inspired the more time I spend in these sort of organisations, how it is such a collective mission. There's no I, there's only we. And I'd like to do more of that. But I think that it's important to get out there as an individual, learn these skills, see where you best fit, see what you can do, and then get involved in that collective, which I think is where I'm at the moment. And yeah, I'm excited for the year ahead, regardless of how the world, whether the world lets us out and about. I'm in Scotland. There's a lot of things that are to be done here for me. I haven't lived in Scotland since I was about 18, so a good while ago. So it's great to be back here and to be able to give back to connect locally and to give back to the local communities that exist here, whether that's snowboarding, whether that's skating, or just environmentally or generally. So I'm really fueled by that, and I think local is pretty important with everything that's going on at the moment. And yeah, maybe that's kind of, we don't always need to be thinking globally or big. Little small ideas or small groups of people can make a big change to local circumstances and situations. And I'm quite fueled by that, especially, working around Lauren McCallum, and at POW UK, and we're always coming up with ideas of what we can do here in Scotland. We've been friends for about 10 years, and originally we were trying to encourage more girls to get on snowboards with her project Lass, and I was working at Cooler with Sam Haddad and trying to do features to get kind of more girls hyped on it and into it. And then now we're working together on kind of POW UK and environmentalism, things that are happening in Scotland, that we can connect more people to nature and understanding the land that we're on and protecting the places we play. So yeah, it all comes around, and I think there's just goes back to the community just being a really great place full of really inspiring people, and I feed off them, and hopefully I can continue to contribute to this industry and this community that I'm a part of.
Maybe this is the year I come and finally do a season in Aviemore.
You might have to. It might be your only choice.
It might be because everyone, we're chatting end of September, and it's started, hasn't it? Like the temperature's fallen, so everyone started posting pictures of snowboarding, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's nearly here." And I've
started collecting together a fleet of split boards, because a big thing that I'm really excited about, and going back to our kind of the start of this conversation, was accessibility into the sports that we love. And we've been splitboarding together in some amazing places, haven't we? We've had some great tours, and I just like to encourage more people in Scotland to get out and tour, because we've not got the most dramatic terrain, unless Ben Nevis is pretty dramatic, but we've got some rolling hills that might have a little bit of snow on the top at some point. So why don't we get more splitboards in Scotland or more splitboards in the UK and just get out for a little hike, walk / snowboard?
Oh fuck, I'm going to come up and do that. I'm definitely...
It doesn't have to be anything dramatic.
Oh, you know me.
I think there's room for that.
I don't give a shit about dramatic. Mellower the better.
We're just trying to make it round our kick turns, really, aren't we?
Yeah, that was so funny when that trip, and I really struggled on the icy slope, and then Dan Yates is like, "Oh, what? You not got any crampons on?" Like everyone else has got crampons. I was like, "All right, okay."
It's like, this makes sense.
All right, that's why everyone's running up there. Okay.
But I think there's a lot of potential for that in Scotland, and I've got in my notepad of ideas, there is something for this season. I'm in Aviemore now, and I'll have the season here. I don't have any plans to go abroad. I haven't been at an airport since end of January, which is crazy for me, because normally I'm at one every couple of weeks.
Yeah, same. I was thinking about that the other day. This is the least I've flown since I was probably a kid, really. Which is
it's kind really of great if you can stop. Yeah, stop, and environmentally it's great, but also it's stop and look around you. What have you got? What do you want to do? What's going on here? Adventure in an adventure sense, and having Scotland as a adventure playground on the doorstep is pretty epic. And I've already been out in the van most of the time between lockdown on every single coast non-stop, just parking up and hiking and swimming, and it's amazing. But yeah, with the snow season coming up, and really, who knows what's going to happen? I think we also don't know what the snow conditions will be like in Scotland. And that's why I think, right, be adaptable, be ready for anything, be ready for, let's get to the very top of the hill just to get one turn in. And that is my plan for the season. And I was thinking, does anyone else want to join me on this? Let's start a collective of people that can't go anywhere else, and that I say have to come to Scotland. It's not really have to, it's like who want to come to Scotland and get on a split board, get their hiking boots out and find that wee patch of snow, because it's still going to be great and it might be all we have this season. But I think we just have to be, as an industry, as humans, on the very basic level right now, it's about being able to adapt, isn't it? Adaptability is key on a daily basis. And I think that's always been a very important characteristic for humans. Yuval Harari, he wrote Sapiens. I don't know if you've read Sapiens, but he talks a lot at the end about what are humans going to need in the future, and they're going to value creativity and adaptability. These are the things that, especially creativity, that the robots won't have the creativity, but they'll be able to adapt. But we need to be able to adapt as well. And I think right now, on the level of just like work, you've got to be able to adapt. But for your adventure, environmentally, with things changing and with the pandemic, we've just got to be ready to kind of grasp anything we can get and stay connected to the adventure and the outdoors and nature, and treat it with respect and get yourself out there, but get more people out there. So I hope that this winter brings this image of me and a crew of socially distant splitboarders hiking up a wee hill in Scotland, and everyone's invited.
I'm going to come. Definitely. Done deal.
Everyone listening to this podcast is invited to that.
Scotland. I love going snowboarding in Scotland. I absolutely love it. I love Aviemore. It's brilliant. So
it's a great experience.
So great. I'm due a trip, so I'm going to come do it. So there you go. That was me and Hannah Bailey, and I hope you enjoyed it. Always really enjoy those conversations with friends, because basically I get to go into them completely unprepared and just see where the chat ends up, like, a normal conversation. Really enjoyed finding out more about the craft and the details of what Hannah does, and also her ambitions for the space in which she's working. Inspiring stuff. I think you'll agree. Big thanks, Han. See you in Scotland soon for that split boarding session. So, housekeeping corner, the period of the show where the part-timers have fucked off and it's just me and the diehards who've stuck around to listen to all this. If I can steal my regular joke from Ben Mundy, who always says this when people leave the pub early, thank fuck they've gone. On this topic, I actually got a message from a listener who wrote me a long old missive about loads of stuff, but this bit stood out. Hey Matt, hope this finds you well. Firstly, I want to say I really enjoy the podcast. I always listen through to housekeeping. I felt very uncomfortable with the Black Squadron analogy, but the fact I got the reference means it was probably pretty accurate. Now, I asked him to elaborate about that. The Black Squadron analogy, in case you missed it, is a reference I made to the Adam and Joe show, where they kind of did a similar sketch about people that listened to the first hour of the show and how they were the elite listening unit, which is kind of where I'm going with the whole housekeeping corner thing, obviously. Anyway, like I say, asked him to elaborate. He said, nothing serious, maybe uncomfortable is wrong. Just didn't see myself as having a super fan geek personality, but realised I probably do since I've been listening to housekeeping on your podcast and knew exactly what Black Squadron was. Mate, don't fight it. That's my advice. The exchange was on Instagram, which, as I mentioned quite frequently, is my main home on the socials. Although I did just bite the bullet and sign up properly to Vero, a relatively new social media site that's been doing the rounds. Now, I've been chatting to Vero about potentially helping to sponsor the Looking Sideways book me and Owen tortuously putting together at a glacial pace. So I thought I'd better get on there and check it out. And got to be honest, it's a pretty nice space. Algorithm free, ad free, and more importantly, dickhead free, it would appear. Basically seems to be loads of people offering recommendations. I mean, there's probably a bit of debate going on as well for books, films, music, and other stuff, which is right up my duck pond, to be honest. Anyway, I'm on there as Looking Sideways podcast if you want to come and say hello. I was early adopter, so I didn't have to go down the whole We Look Sideways route, which has proved so confusing to so many people over the years. On the subject of feedback on Instagram, segue alert. I mean, I got a massive response to the Christina Cook episode. And I think Christina was very touched by the messages that I was sharing with her and the general response. Loads of them were positive. I did get one that I'm going to read out, which did make me laugh, actually. It was from Instagram. It is, again, another theme. It's probably my favourite ever complisal that I've had. He, of course, it was a he, writes, "Sorry to say, but that last episode was rubbish in my humble opinion. I'm definitely more on Gil Scott-Heron's side with this one. The whole space exploration thing feels like somebody decided to go to the pub to find solutions for his rotten marriage and the plumbing issues in his house. That said, it's good to view some perspectives that don't align with mine, and I'm looking forward to your next creation. Keep 'em coming." I mean, that's great, isn't it? Pretty much the perfect complisal, which, as regular listeners will know, I do like to seek out. What else is going on? Well, as me and Hannah discussed, the mercury's dropping in the thermometer, and my thoughts naturally have been turning to snowboarding. I'm definitely going to go away, even if it is just to Scotland. But this is the time when I usually end up dusting off the old journalism hat and doing a load of writing about snowboarding. And happy to say that I started already this year, and I've got a piece coming out in the forthcoming issue of the Snowboarder's Journal. Now, over the years, I think I've written for every snowboard magazine on the planet pretty much. I've been lucky enough to have a column in Transworld Snowboarding. I've written regular stories for Snowboarder. This was a long time ago. I'm not sure they'd let me through the door these days. But I've never had anything in the Snowboard Journal. And this was an interview with my friend and erstwhile guest, Elias Elhart. And it was a real privilege telling his story through this considered print format. And I'm proud of the result, to be honest. Big shout out to the Snowboard Journal editor Colin Wiseman as well for being one of the best I've ever worked with in this industry, I'm going to say. Did a brilliant job, really helped me make that piece, took it to another level. Always brilliant working with a good editor. Thank you, Colin. Anyway, have a gander. Snowboard Journal's great. Nice to tick that one off the list after all these years. I'm also looking forward to working with my friend Taz Hagar on the latest issue of Curator magazine. Now, last year I had the privilege of editing that magazine, which is quite a throwback since I used to make my living editing snowboard magazines. Hadn't edited a full mag for a while. Enjoyed it very much. Looks like we'll be working together on the next volume of Curator this winter as well. Taz is doing a great thing with that independently published snowboard magazine, so I'll make sure I share the bejesus out of it when we finish working on that one. On which recommendatory, if that is even a word, bombshell, I'll leave you to it for this week. Thank you again, Hannah. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, give it a share and all that. I'll see you next week. Nice one.